So welcome to John McDonald, who's the head of biosecurity and RDE at Greenlife Industry Australia. He has been instrumental in the past in helping us get minor use permits for chemicals for the use of myrtle rust. And he's going to speak a little bit to that today about minor use permits and sort of the background work that goes on with that, but also more on biosecurity generally. So thank you very much, John. And please go ahead.
Thanks, Veronica. I will endeavour now to share my screen. Hopefully we get what we need. And do we have the...
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Okay, I've got a reasonable amount of information to share because we're a very sort of broad area that we work in. But I would like to acknowledge and thank Veronica for the invitation that started all of this. Veronica has been engaging with me for over a year or two in relation to the management of myrtle rust and how we could help. I work with as Veronica introduced me, I'm with Greenlife Industry Australia. Greenlife Industry Australia is the peak industry body for nursery production across Australia. And what I felt was the best way for me, it would be very short otherwise, talk about how we operate within this whole area of plant biosecurity and our sustainable plant production. Basically, I want to talk about today our national project, which is levy funded, which is the National Biosecurity and Sustainable Plant Production Program. And I'll talk about the National Plant Biosecurity System, Pesticide Minor Use Permit Program, and then finish up with our sustainable plant production and the things that we do with industry. Just need to make this relatively clear that we are levy funded. So the nursery industry has a statutory levy that is collected and managed by the Commonwealth Department of Agriculture. And then the monies and projects are managed under Hort Innovation. And GIA is a prescribed body under that Commonwealth legislation for levy. Hence, this national project is parked with Greenlife Industry Australia. The nursery industry, hugely diverse sector of horticulture. We're located in every state and territory and all over the place. We're not hubbed like a lot of plant-based industries are in certain regions. We're everywhere. Queensland, they're along the eastern seaboard and out as far west as Longreach, Roma, out past there, even out close to Cunnamulla. So we're widely dispersed. We're producing in excess of 30,000 cultivars and species across a range of our major supply chains. So most people refer or link the nursery industry to the urban retail, so ornamentals sold through Bunnings, garden centres, etc. But we're also production nurseries supporting the landscape sector. Fruit and vegetables, all of the seedlings that are grown for farmers are produced by production nurseries, as are the fruit trees. A lot of the varietal introductions, particularly for fruit and nut trees, are actually driven by production nurseries. And they have the skill sets to work with grafting, budding, whatever, onto appropriate rootstocks, supplying farmers. And we're also involved in forestry, both pine, eucalypt, as well as farm forestry. And we have revegetation nurseries. Eastern seaboard is relatively evenly split in production value, which at the moment is around about 2.8 billion per annum for the nursery sector, with 28% in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. What we do, the National Biosecurity and Sustainable Plant Production Project, I tried to break this up into a couple of areas. We do the national biosecurity. So we are connected into the National Biosecurity System through the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed, and we are the signatory to that deed for the nursery sector. So we have a major role in the domestic plant biosecurity system We're involved in incursion responses. And as you can appreciate, with the diversity of our cropping sector, we are included in just about every single incursion that pops up. We are working tirelessly around industry biosecurity preparedness, and we have degrees of adoption around that from the industry. We wish it was greater. Unfortunately, biosecurity still, to this day and age, with our sector in most of horticulture, we're still living 50 years ago where there were limited pressures on the system. They have changed markedly, and I'll put some words behind that later. And then the other big area is market access. Under the Australian biosecurity system, we're a federation of states, and every state has the legal right to manage its borders and allow goods to move across those borders. And so with the nursery sector, we've got massive amounts of plant material moving, and market access is critical to the success of our businesses as well as to their clients. We do limited import-export at the moment. We do keep a watching brief, but live plants are pretty much curtailed to tissue culture on the import side, and we've got a very small export. We also look after the pesticides, minor use permit program, which is the off-label, pardon me, for pesticides, which I'll go into. The sustainable plant protection side of what we do, we have research, development, and extension. I manage a team of extension officers who operate around the country. The right table there gives an indication of the current extension officers and their locales. And the other big area we work on, which is best management practice, which falls under the umbrella of our sustainable plant production, which I'll expand on. So the project is big. We cover a lot of areas. You can see there that we've broken them up into 4 critical areas. So we have grower capability and sustainable production. And this is where a lot of our biosecurity preparedness as well as best practice, etc., sits. To the right, on the top right, we represent levy payers in the biosecurity system, as I mentioned. And then we have resource development and communications and levy research, statistics, etc. And so there are various elements that we deliver. Some of that material is linked through the extension network. Some of it is through other projects that are levy funded that feed back into our major project. So we are the main project for information and technology to the nursery production sector. As it stands at the moment, some of the critical areas of the project, at the moment, we're counting up to May. We will be exceeding 7,000 extension visits by the end of this year. We have 4,771 e-learning courses have been completed by 1,728 users. Those e-learning are primarily around biosecurity preparedness. The EPP RD, so that's the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed, our obligations, they are meetings, forums, and things that we have to participate in the decision-making around responses and the operation of the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed. The additional 394 AMS users, the audit management system is our digital best practice, and I'll put a bit more info around that later. Our technical information library, we've got an online platform where we park all of our technical information, which is available to our levy payers. So at the moment, we're running around 39,000 odd users. So that's a lot of staff from a lot of our businesses get connected into this because they're actually doing the work and they require the individual technical bits. We produced 62 tech articles. We delivered 963 mini tech skills courses. We'll have over 1,000 of those completed by the end of this year. This is something that we've developed of recent years where workshops used to be a common practice within the industry. That stopped. And we decided to look at working with individual growers who are operating under the best practice protocols and deliver face-to-face for their staff. One of the things that are quite unique with nursery production is that we have a lot of employees compared to the rest of horticulture who are very seasonal, and we have these full-time employees, and we're working with industry to guide them in the benefits of training their staff instead of the upper management retaining all of the knowledge and feeding it out piecemeal. And we're seeing significant improvements in business productivity and sustainability. Pest ID tool, I'll mention that later on. We've got 4,000 in that platform. Something that we'll be talking about, minor use permits. We've now actually got, I think it's about 64 minor use permits, and the technical information library where we nearly 140,000 page views are to date. So we've got a lot of information and resources that we provide for the nursery sector. The National Biosecurity System. Now, this is an incredibly complex process. I don't expect you all to walk away understanding it completely. However, part of what we're charged with is the top set of bar graph, which is the EPPRD, which is, as I say, the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed. And each of those bars represents a roughly a 6-month period in the project life, and the activities that I have undertaken generally, it's me that manages this area. So you can see the EPPRD, the bottom green, has got 209 actions. That is because since August last year, we had the detection of tomato brown rugose fruit virus, and we've also got ongoing programs around polyphagous shot hole borer, banana freckle, and we detected the top virus in Tasmania. So depending on what's going on, my actions and activities can be heavily involved. And tomato brown rugose fruit virus has proved interesting, to say the least, as has the polyphagous shot hole borer. So hence a lot of meetings to sort things out. The bottom set of bars are the biosecurity engagement. So that's actually working with our brother and sister horticultural industries, working with other sectors around our biosecurity engagement. This just gives you a bit of an idea of the risk that the nursery industry is exposed to, relevant to the machinations around our biosecurity system. Basically, they are 10 commodities that our industry produces as nursery stock, and the movement is of actual plant material, not the produce, but of the plant material crossing borders, etc. To give an indication of some of the complexities around this, we can have strawberry tissue culture propagated in Queensland. It can be sent down to Tasmania. It can be grown on and multiplied out of Tasmania. Tasmania then can send it back up to Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland. For certain tree stocks, they are actually brought into the country as rootstock, go through the Mickleham quarantine facility in Victoria, and then are sent across to WA. They're multiplied, grown, and then they are sent back to the eastern states over 18 months to 2 years after originally coming out of quarantine. So movement of nursery stock is a massive issue for our industry, and getting a greater concern because of the economies of scale and how businesses are operating, as well as how our client base. So, for example, we can look at retail, and Bunnings is dominant in that space, anywhere from 70 to 80% of the ornamental market. They can be sourcing material in cans for distribution in every other jurisdiction. So we need to streamline and get industry to participate at a greater level in biosecurity, but we also have to look after that opportunity through market access. Some of the major biosecurity threats that we are now seeing, we were talking about these 20 years ago and saying this was coming, and it's truly arrived. We as plant industries in Australia, on average, are dealing with 40 new pest incursions each year. So these are things that have not been recorded previously in the country. Now, not all of those are going to be economically or environmentally damaging. For example, they could be a species of aphid in a genera that we already have, and there's no distinction between it and the one that's already here. So the likelihood of spending millions, tens of millions, in eradicating something that's not going to really change the dynamic is generally not occurring. But we look at those things where we feel we don't have it, it is unique, and it is offering an economic impact. That's under the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed. If it doesn't fit under the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed, it'll go to what they call NEBRA, which is the National Environmental Response by something. I can't remember the exact wording, but NEBRA is where it goes, and it's managed by government. So we've got global trends in the marketplace. It's just massive the way things are changing, and domestically, our operations, particularly across in supply chain, within the supply chains, the big are getting bigger, and the small are either staying small and supplying the bigger, or are disappearing. We've got growing trade, travelers, and tourism. That's changing things. The number of shipping containers now arriving in this country compared to a decade ago is mind-boggling, and what they are forecasting for the future is further mind-boggling. And these shipping containers are a massive risk, particularly for a lot of the hitchhiker pests like brown marmorated stink bug, capra beetle, and invasive ant species. Increasing imports, as I said, more complex supply chains, climate variability is widening the environments that these pests can operate in. You look back 25 years ago, the bulk of the incursions were in northern Queensland. We've now been watching northern Queensland, Northern Territory, northern WA. We're watching these things now moving quite comfortably down the coast down as far as Sydney, and they're very comfortable, and we'll start to see them moving into Victoria. This just gives you a quick snapshot on the active responses that have been going on since 2002 through to 2025. The table on the left is the number of detections that have led to a cost-shared response. So that's been money on the table. And on the right, the number of active national biosecurity emergency responses, again, what we've paid for from 2002 to 25. That light green shading is plant industry under the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed. So you can actually see across the years from 2010 to today, we've had incursion responses that we've been funding in the plant sector every single year. And you can see that has been systematically increasing. The blue are the environmental responses. So predominantly they're things like, I think if memory serves me at the moment, most of the environmental stuff are weeds or marine issues. And then the dark blue are the what they call deed-like. And you can see that's relatively stable. That's that bottom one. That's red imported fire ant. Red imported fire ant came in before these emergency deeds were established. So red imported fire ant is funded outside of any of the animals or plant deeds. So it's as we say, we've been talking about this, particularly with industry, for years, and it's all coming to fruition. This particular slide is just showing 2025 and the areas that we have been working in. And the yellow highlighted pests are incursion responses that we're involved in. Some of them we are cost sharing, others we are simply monitoring. So you can see banana freckle up in the Northern Territory, polyphagous shot-hole borer, red imported fire ants, tomato brown rugose fruit, tomato potato psyllid, and brown marmorated stink bug. We had a massive year with brown marmorated stink bug, smashing all previous records. You can see it says Queensland, New South Wales, WA, Vic and Tas, all detections of brown marmorated stink bug with it from about January through to June, I think it was this year. And it was, each of those jurisdictions had multiple detections of this thing. So that is really concerning. brown, if you want to find out how bad brown marmorated stink bug is, do your Googles and look at it. It can really stuff up a lot of things. It's very much an invasive hitchhiking species. The national system, I keep moving very quickly. We've got government agencies, industries. You can see we're up at the top. We work with government. Then we have coordinating bodies such as Plant Health Australia for us. The yellow areas are where we're really working. Plant Health Australia is the custodian of the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed. 37 plant industries are signatories to the deed. All state, territory and the Commonwealth government are also signatories to the Emergency Plant Pest Response Deed. And that simply tells us how we're going to do things. So we have on the left is the Government Plant Industry Cost Sharing Deed. That's the EPPRD. The middle one is the Australian Emergency Plant Pest Response Plan. So that's called Plant Plan. That actually details how, what, when people will do, what their roles, responsibilities are in a more defined way, guiding an emergency response. We develop response plans under these two documents for the eradication of a pest. It also spells out the cost sharing apportionments that will go to government, industry, and that's based on the categorisation of a pest, which can be a category 1, 2, 3, or 4. And that determines industry, for example, a category 3 will be 50-50 split. Government will fund 50% and the cost-sharing industries will fund 50%. We can go to a category 4, which is an 80-20, which is government industry 20%, government 80%. Category 1 is 100% government. Market access, as I mentioned in the intro, market access is also a critical area in our biosecurity system, and we need to make sure we can maintain that for our growers. As you can see, each state and territory has the legislative authorities to implement restrictions. They have all signed up to what's called IGAB, the Intergovernmental Agreement on Biosecurity, and that agreement technically was to ensure that any restrictions they put in place, A, must be technically justified, and B, be the least trade restrictive. Lovely in principle. It's a bit of a disaster in practice from our experience, and governments are traditionally terribly risk averse, and they put on conditions that are almost impossible for industry to work with in some situations. But the most maddening thing from an industry's perspective, for the same pest, same commodity, we can have 7 different movement controls because of jurisdictions kind of outdoing each other and having some sort of competition. So it's very complex for industry, and we believe it's actually a system that's increasing the risk of moving a quarantine pest as opposed to preventing that movement. So all of our growers moving stock interstate have to look at what those entry conditions are for those jurisdictions and their commodities, and then they have to comply. There are a number of ways that you can comply as a business. If the jurisdiction you reside in creates an interstate certification assurance arrangement with the receiving governments, then our growers can be certified under an ICA arrangement for a particular pest and trade under that. There are some dodgy bilateral agreements between some jurisdictions. They're called CAs. We don't put a lot of weight on those. There can be a permit. A government can issue a permit. And then we've got entry condition compliance procedures under Biosecure HACCP. That's our program, and I'll put a little bit more detail around that in a moment. And the work we do around industry preparedness, on the right there, you can see there's a number of things. There's the Industry Biosecurity Plan. We developed that in conjunction with Plant Health Australia, and that's there to advise on a high level, what are the major risks that we see, the threats, and what do we have in place to work in this biosecurity area. We have the Biosecure HACCP program, which was on that last slide. Biosecure HACCP is our biosecurity program. It's actually our plant protection and biosecurity program for our growers. And then over on the far right is our information, which is through our bulletins and technical papers. This one specifically referencing the nursery levy. I mentioned that at the beginning. Our statutory levy funds a lot of our preventative activities that we are operating for our industry, as well as liaising and operating under the emergency plant pest response deed, and then all of our technical transfer. So that bottom area about the levy, it's research and development, marketing and promotion, biosecurity programs, and then there's the administration and levy collection. All of that sitting under the nursery products levy. And we have to try and get the maximum out of that very limited investment. Those of you who may know, with Hort Innovation, with a statutory levy under Hort Innovation, RDE is funded at $1 for dollar. So if we as an industry raise $3 million, the Commonwealth will match that dollar for dollar, transforming our levy value up to $6 million a year. And grower resources that we are building for the industry under biosecurity is on the left there is the Australian Nursery Industries Myrtle Rust. That's our management plan. That's version 3. From our perspective, it's working very, very well across our production nurseries. We are not seeing myrtle rust as a major plant pathogen within our production systems. Our growers, one of the things I think we did at the very early stages back in 2010-11 was to make sure that our sector was not a reservoir for this pathogen and make sure that we got on top of it. A lot of the truly highly susceptible varieties have pretty much exited the industry, and the industry is finding its own way through these more resistant varieties, as well as applying an effective management structure around it. So we did that plan. We do nursery. These are the nursery technical papers. We update industry, and on the right is our most recent management plan for tomato brown rugose fruit virus. Okay, moving into the chemical field. So basically our minor use permit is basic preserving access to pesticides for the industry. New chemistry is being made available to our industry. Manufacturers, the way this works, manufacturers come into the country, or they're already here, Bayer and mental blank, Syngenta, etc. They're all here. They've got their products. They bring them into Australia. Nobody else does. It's the actual chemistry. The owner of the chemistry brings them in. That first dot point under that one where it says Australia lags the USA by 10 to 15 years for new actives. This is quite concerning, but it's a fact of just an economic fact of life. We're a terribly small market, and so they focus on their big markets, but it also limits the availability of some of these newer actives, which are less toxic, have less side effects, less third-party damage, and all of those things. And we're trying desperately to fast-track that, and the APVMA is trying to help us in that area. A high cost of any new molecule, so it's 30 to 60. It's more likely 60 million now in Australia to register, just to register it. And then, of course, you've got environmental, community, and market pressures on old and some of our new actives. So Bunnings, for example, put some pressure on the industry relevant to the neonicotinoids. So that's Confidor. They were taking advice out of Europe around bee and colony death, which is not replicated in Australia. And the APVMA doesn't support it, but Bunnings did. So growers that are supplying Bunnings can't use products such as Confidor. And the organophosphates, well, industry doesn't want to use them anyway, but some cases we're stuck with them because the APVMA won't register an alternative. So the APVMA provides a number of pathways to getting access. There's the label registration, which the companies must do. The one that we will talk about here is the minor use permits allowed by the APVMA designated minor use crops. So nursery at the moment kind of sits there, but they've kicked us out in the past and brought us back in when we showed them that if you took up all of our individual commodities, they're very small in comparison to grains, for example. So We are operating comfortably at the moment. And then there's emergency permits, which we will apply for with government when we have an incursion of something that we don't have a product registered to manage. APVMA can deliver that quite quickly. So industry investment in what we're doing. So we have a minor use program. I manage that. To keep the ones we've got, which of course with government, you've got to keep paying for. So every few years, depending on the life of the permit, we've got to pay for it to be renewed. We talk to government, obviously, that we're targeting a more modern chemistry, which is difficult sometimes when they say you've already got a product registered, but we say it's an organophosphate. We don't actually want to use that. We want to use a softer. And so it can be counterproductive pushing this new chemistry model with APVMA. We've got, as I say, this large cropping base and diverse supply chains. Industry, what we're doing to protect the active ingredients we have, we strategically use our actives, so avoiding resistance, understand the products and how they work, a systemic versus a contact versus an ingestive, so industry actually knows how to use it. And then knowledge-based decision-making, which comes through good things like crop monitoring, site surveillance, import and dispatch inspections. So some of the key drivers for us: ensure replacement pesticides for old chemistry, monitor the national and international issues and look at alternatives, ensure resistance management with a minimum of 3 active, seek out softer, innovative chemistry and fill the gaps in the market, such as for quarantine pests, such as MaxGuard for red fire ants. We seek our active ingredients for a permit. They're not label registered for nursery production. So we go looking. Some products we have label registration. Not often is the industry a target for the new manufacturers because we're a small user. Large industry, but individual, our businesses use small volume of a very large range because of the huge diversity of crops, pests, and phytotoxic actions. So the company owning the active ingredient must support it. It must obviously be registered from our view in Australia. We won't go for anything that's not already here. And as I said, they give significant weight to existing actives within the same mode of action as well. Annually, we go for about 5 actives where we can. However, if we've got to renew permits, that takes money out of the pool. So, for example, this year, 2025, there are no new actives. We're renewing a whole swag of existing permits, which is taking up all of our allocation of funds for this year. We go for insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, molesticides, whatever the industry is needing at that time. We look at national input from our industry, looking for actives. We engage a consultant who works with me to put our applications together, work with the companies, etc. And once we submit our applications, generally it's anywhere from 6 to 12 months, even though the APVMA have a standing work procedure to deliver within 6, very rarely that they do. Over the past 12 years, 68 new actives have been added to the nursery industry, and the bulk of those actives are the softer chemistry and allowing us to stop using particularly organophosphates. Myrtle Rust, this is a permit that we have in place for Myrtle Rust currently. Anyone who's been playing with Myrtle Rust in the production sense will be aware of this. The major issue that we encountered here was plant vax, which was a Schedule 7. While it's still legally registered and all the rest of it, you actually can't buy it. So that drove us to seek out Elatus, which is there on the right under a different permit now, to find a Schedule 7 that we could use with Myrtle Rust. And we were successful in achieving that. So when you look at the table above the highlighted MUP, 95119, that table above gives you those active ingredients, but not the Elatus. So the idea is you would remove oxycarboxyn, which is the 3rd one down. You delete that, you'd put Elatus in there, because it is in the third column down, the chemical group is the mode of action group. And in rotation, you want your mode of action group to be different for each different fungicide or insecticide or herbicide you use to manage the same pest in rotation. And I'll touch on that in a moment. So we've also got a couple of other actives that we are looking at that are still in the pipeline that will also come over and cover off myrtle rust in broader registrations for rusts generally. And this just gives you an idea of the mode of action, where you find that. The red circle, so each of those are different labels. Movento is an insecticide, Mancozeb is a fungicide, and obviously Roundup is a herbicide. However, on the labels, they all have that red circled area, which is the mode of action group. So a group 23 insecticide is not the same as a group 23 herbicide, vice versa, etc. The number is relevant to whether it is an insecticide, fungicide, or herbicide in that stream they are in. And so the idea would be for insecticides such as Movento to target the particular pest that is managing. You might have 3 active ingredients in a rotation program, and that they're all got to have a different group number. So 23, 1A, and 7, for example. The same with Mancozeb. You would have an M3, you would have a 24 and a 27. Okay, because fungicides can have an alphanumeric code just to trick everybody up. They used to have solely alphanumeric, and now it is both alphanumeric and numeric on its own, and the groupings for herbicides as well. We have a digital platform to help our growers sort through their minor use program and get the permits they need. This just shows you, for example, selecting for whitefly. So you look up at the top right hand, the red circle, it says whitefly. That's the search for the pest. All of these permits drop down. The green area says mode of action, and then the yellows are giving you the group 5, group 1B, group 12A, and a 28. So that our growers know that if they want to manage whitefly in an insect and use a pesticide rotation program, they will use Dimlin, dimethoate, and Minico Forte. So it's structured for them to work out how to get the best out of these new chemistries. These new chemistries are generally quite specific and a narrow band, and resistance can be quite quick if it's used poorly. I'm not going to hang on this one. These are just 2 tables of all of the active ingredients and permits that we've achieved to date for the industry and all of the different pests, etc., that we are aiming to manage. So I think we, as a minor use industry, we've got the most permits of any of the other sectors. Finally, our Australian plant our Australian plant production standard. This is where we drive sustainable industry practices. We've got 3 main programs that hang under our Australian plant production standard. We've got the NIASA BMP guidelines, so that's best management practice. NIASA, as you can see there, stands for the Nursery Industry Accreditation Scheme Australia. We have our EcoHort guidelines and the Biosecure HACCP guidelines. So we roll these out. We use the elements within all of these manuals to work with our industry, particularly in our extension program, to actually get businesses to move and upgrade and change their practices to a more sustainable, but it's also proving more profitable to operate at this higher level. Getting businesses to do that can be a challenge because they've been in business for many years. They're still profitable. They will complain that they're not as profitable as they used to be. And we try to point out that's because they're still 30 years old in their activities, and try to move them in everywhere from irrigation, growing media, growing surfaces, pest management, etc. To give you an idea, Biosecure HACCP has a big focus on crop monitoring, site surveillance, import and dispatch inspections. Our growers will still tend to focus on the old chemical solutions because that's what we've been doing for so long. But prior to chemicals, all of the things that we talk about around inspection, surveillance, and monitoring are things we actually used to do. So we've become so complacent, we rely on the chemicals. We're now walking them back from that because it's actually not as profitable as people might think it is. So it comes down to the integrated pest management side of things. Why have we got this? I said we provide a resource of critical plant production elements all in the one program, so that they all work together, they all talk to each other through the 3 programs. We house our new plant production elements, so all of our levy investments in RD&E, we update that information into those manuals, whichever one it's relevant to, so we don't lose what our research projects develop, which is a common problem across horticulture. They sit on a shelf, and it's difficult to then integrate that into production systems. Our way, by having these clearly defined best practice programs, allows this material to be made fit for purpose for adoption by our growers. Everything we do is transparent. It facilitates the application of industry programs across all of these disciplines in a concise way and adds value to the things that they do. So, for example, moving into best practice irrigation by applying at the right rate, at the right frequency and spacings, etc. Not only is it good for irrigating crops and get the best out of it, it's also actually a good environmental outcome. You use less water. So that then feeds into, so you do that under the best management practice for your irrigation design, and then it transfers across to your environmental management system. Evidence-based process, and the nursery users of nursery stock and regulatory authorities have assurance that plants purchased are appropriate. The risks have been managed appropriately is our aim for our growers. Nationally administered and operated by Greenlife Industry Australia. We have a national governance committee, which is made up of state representatives who provide oversight. We have a national administrator that works in that area. We are, those that move to the top of the range are independently audited. They actually seek certification. They are independently audited. Our auditors are SAI Global Lead Auditor qualified, so in often higher qualifications than most government biosecurity auditors. We have audit checklists and action plans, and then accreditation is issued upon minor compliance. So very quickly, the NIASA program, we focus on the production system. So nursery design, layout, operation. We look at production efficiencies. We have pests, plant pest and disease hygiene, but it's more to do with how we set up, we prevent it. So don't grow on dirt, have gravel growing beds, store your growing media in appropriate storage bays, etc. So avoid that contamination. And then we have best management around water, growing surfaces, crop nutrition, measuring and monitoring, and occupational health and safety, particularly just around at the moment the pesticide application. We are also working with our brother and sister horticultural sectors. So under the NIASA program, we've also got an avocado nursery stock specification, a banana, landscape, macadamia, strawberry, and an ethical. So these are another element that production nurseries who work in those supply chains. So for example, an avocado nursery does all of the normal best practice NIASA stuff, but then because the avocado industry wants some specific assurances around the tree growth for that nursery, they'll seek our avocado nursery stock specification, which then gives the avocado growers confidence that their trees are being produced in the best system possible. We are also working with the citrus industry, nuts, vines, which are grapevines, and mini tubers. So it's a process we've been pushing for some years now. And we join, as I say, with other peak industry bodies in those commodities to work with us. EcoHort is our environmental management system. So basically, very quickly, land, water, air, noise, waste, and biodiversity. So we work with our growers to minimise their impacts and footprints across all of these areas. And this comes down to things like using the appropriate materials. So not using things like polystyrene in growing media, getting rid of that, not using polystyrene boxes, using cardboard, paper, that is all recyclable, recycling plastic containers, recycling water, disinfesting it and using it again and again and again. We talk about composting appropriately so they minimize odors, waste, all of the normal things under an environmental management system, but we run it, it's not a third party, so that it's fit for purpose and still maintains productivity and profitability for our growers. Then there's the Biosecure HACCP program. So this is something quite unique in horticulture. We're the only industry that actually has such a defined program. It's our high health plant production system. It's an integrated plant protection and biosecurity system. If you have a well-structured and robust plant protection program operating to its highest efficiencies and levels, it will by default land you in a perfect biosecurity system. So what we're doing is across horticulture and across government, they almost separate plant biosecurity from plant protection. Growers think they've got to do something more. They actually don't, because a good plant protection program requires you to monitor across your crop monitoring, site surveillance, import and dispatch inspections, etc. That's what a good biosecurity program requires. Capture that data, and then you can actually prove to government that you don't have something. And we've been able to work with our industry and achieve this. And what we've also achieved is 3 to 5% annual productivity gains. We believe now it's actually probably closer to 10% productivity gains annually. We're reducing labour, reducing pesticides, and we're having an improved efficacy on the beneficials that we're all integrating through our IPN, using softer chemistry, introducing beneficials. These are all working where they didn't used to work, but we've put a structure around all of that for our growers. The last item there is we're recognised by state and territory governments. We're the only non-government plant market access program. So at the beginning, I spoke about a plant health assurance certificate, etc., permits, in ICAs, etc., and then the Biosecure HACCP program. So we're the only ones that have got this government approval. So that allows us, GIA, we're the accrediting authority. We accredit our businesses under Biosecure HACCP to meet the guidelines, etc., etc. And we negotiate with state governments for the market access across borders. Our growers implement those conditions. We accredit them and certify and audit them. And governments recognise that and allow our businesses to self-certify for their interstate trade. We're the only one that has an e-certification, so our Biosecure HACCP biosecurity certificates that are issued are all generated electronically. Our entire system is electronic, noting the government system for domestic trade in Australia is all paper-based. In actual fact, I was just criticising WA today. They still require our businesses to mail physical copies of certificates to them. Mail it. And this is how bad it is when working in our domestic system. So we're a fully automated web-based system. Very quickly, this is our what we call our audit management system, but this is where we bring all of our certified growers. They end up with their own portal, kind of look like this, where they can manage their entire apps program. So their NIASA accreditation, all of the records and things they've got to do there. We've digitized it. We've put it all on there. They can put it on their phones and they're capturing that information in the field. As an example here, our crop monitoring, they're capturing that data on the field. It's all being stored for them and they can generate reports as they need to. This is where our knowledge-based system comes into play, because they're now actually got massive amounts of historical data that they can go back and look at what kind of pest pressures did they have in December last year, prepare themselves for December this year, and they can actually do proactive things where they actually aren't even having the problem anymore. So it's all driven through knowledge. So we're building more and more capacity for our growers in this space. We also have this particular, so I mentioned earlier, where the minor use permits are all parked. So we have this technical information library. It's an open source it's people can look at it, but bear in mind it is for production nurseries. So all of our minor use permits are for production nurseries. Very difficult for non-commercial operators to access a lot of those chemistries because they're not retail sold. But this is just giving you an idea of where we've moved all digital, getting our industry critical access to critical information at the critical time. And we're training them. Big part of our extension program, training them on actually how to help themselves. Then we have this platform, which is our pest identification, the pestid.com.au platform. This is about the only live pest identification platform in Australia, as in horticulture. All of the others are generally an app-based system, and they fund it and then they never change because the money runs out and they're never updated. We're actually updating this continuously. I have a project officer that I employ to do this for 2 days a week and keeps building. So when we have an emergency plant pest incursion, if we don't have it in there, I'll have it in there within 24 hours for our industry to know what it looks like and some of the critical information they need. So we keep working on that for industry. Thank you very much. That wraps it up, Veronica and Pip.
Pip, are you still with us?
I am. I'm too scared to try. Thank you so much, John. That was incredibly informative. And I was actually laughing to myself saying, I'm glad we've recorded it because I might have to go back and have a more detailed look at some of those slides. But thanks again to everybody who came. John, have you got time for a question before you need to run off, or?
Yeah, happy. Got a few minutes.
Yep.
If there's anything anybody particularly wants to know.
Any questions from people?
I've got one. I'll just jump in while we're seeing if anyone else does. John, I mean, there's so much going on in that sort of biosecurity space. Of everything that is going on, what do you see as being the greatest challenges in the next 5 to 10 years?
As in pest-wise or in system?
Yeah.
Pest-wise, I have absolutely no idea. For the nursery sector, what I do believe is it's going to most likely be a hitchhiker. So it'll be something like brown marmorated stink bug. Snails are a massive issue. And the reason I say that is because of the way our industry trades. And often, even though it may not be a pest specifically of our crops, it's the movement of things. So, for example, red imported fire ant is a massive trade disruptor. It's not a pest of our crops. It's the market side. And so that's where I see things. When fire ants moved into northern New South Wales over a year ago, the disruption and the mayhem that the regulator caused, because they are, to be quite frank, pretty bad at dealing with this. They're very bad at being proactive, and then they'll take all of the ownership of it, even though we're supposed to be sharing it. They'll take all of the ownership and they'll really criticize and make it very difficult for industry to put their case forward. We keep saying we manage pests every day. They don't, yet they all of a sudden become the experts. So it is quite frustrating, Veronica. I think that will be the thing. But when I look at what's currently pounding our borders, we are seeing marmorated stink bug, and we are seeing what else was there? Nothing at the level that marmorated stink bug is, and it is so widespread in so many of our major trading partners. They're finding these things, just so many, hundreds, inside cars, in the chassis, under wheel wells, because they park these cars in storage places overseas after they've been built. They've all got this bloody pest, and it all goes in and it overwinters. So I guess when the cars are picked up for Australia in winter and they're brought over. And so even New Zealand a couple of years ago turned an entire car ship around and refused it entry coming from Japan but it's in Italy. We've seen them just pour out of tiles, shipping containers full of tiles. It's that sort of stuff. So I think that's where I think we're going to find the problems. It's getting more expensive, and by a multiplication factor of, I don't know, 20 to do this work, because state governments have reduced resourcing, even though they try to say they haven't, but they actually have, particularly in the plant area. They struggle to keep up with just their day-to-day work, let alone an incursion. They don't have the experience. They lose all of that corporate knowledge when some of our longer-term people leave, and they never mentored them. They bring somebody across from another completely different department who then sort of claims they'll be an expert. So there's a whole lot of things that feed into the risks that I see us being exposed to.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, John. It is 3 o'clock, so I'm just aware that you had another meeting at 3. But I'd wanted to say a really big thank you for coming along today and preparing that very comprehensive slide set. I'm sure it has given a lot of people lots to think about, but also one of the things I might do is just pull up again, the explanation for people of how you actually go through the process of sourcing some of the information, and we'll try and make that a bit more available too, particularly for people who are not directly connected into Greenlife, but who might be interested in accessing the resources. So thanks again. Thanks to people for turning up, and we'll pop this up on our YouTube channel for people who weren't able to make it, or for people who could only make it partway through.
Excellent. Thank you all very much. Appreciate you staying awake. Take care.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Veronica. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pip.
Thanks.